Roy Blunt joins us from a secured bunker. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning. How are you this morning, McGraw?
We're doing good. Thanks for checking in. Lots going on in Washington, including the two big stories, tariffs and immigration. Let's first start with immigration. What are your thoughts as you sit and watch what's going on in the last week or so?
Well, interestingly, I think the president's determination to actually enforce the law has driven the other side way over a cliff. I mean, we now have people talking about eliminating immigration control. We have people in the Senate talking about open borders. Surely we've learned enough from Europe to know that open borders don't define a country. They actually create concerns that the government of that country no longer functions. I thought the way that the family separation was approached was a mistake. I said that at the very first day that this became an issue, but I think the president's effort to try to enforce the law, to try to actually get people before, now my view would be we should get families before a judge as soon as possible and determine if they meet the asylum requirements, if they really have left a situation that would be too dangerous to return to. But this whole idea that everybody should just be told, okay, go on into the country and here's a date that you should show up for court, almost nobody did that. Almost nobody did that. And this is not a problem that's a new problem. It's a problem that has been dealt with in a way that encouraged families to even send children alone in the late after Obama's DACA determination. We've had thousands of children that the Department of Health and Human Services has been trying to deal with now for about 6 or 8 years, maybe longer than that. We've got to put some common sense back into this discussion.
It seems like, from reading the news this morning, that there aren't enough facilities for detaining families together, so they've reverted back to this catch and release that was part of the
that
Obama.
Does appear to be the news this morning, but the news is a little conflicting there, and I'm not sure I'm ready to comment on that yet. I am actually going to be at the White House at lunch today with the various appropriation committee chairmen, and I'm one of those to talk about where we are on trying to move forward in a appropriations process, a spending process that people could see. I read that pretty carefully last night and this morning myself, and it seems to me we're hearing two different messages here, but clearly the government was not set up to handle this in a way that met the standard of who we are when the president said we're going to have a zero tolerance policy at the border. I'm actually for that, but you have to be prepared to enforce that as it relates to families in a better way than we were. But remember, there have been thousands of children coming to the country unaccompanied, particularly since President Obama's DACA order, thinking if they could get here, they'd be able to stay. So we've been sending lots of mixed messages for some time now on the border and on the government's view of what the border is all about. I think the people I work for are generally very positive about legal immigration, but they do want a border that is defined and enforced by the federal government.
Senator, both parties agree that the immigration system is broken. Businesses say it's broken. Everyone associated with this says the current system is the worst, and yet we continue this because both sides refuse to compromise. Any chance, any compromise bill of a big immigration reform anytime in the future?
Well, McGraw, you and I have been talking about this for a long time, and so I'd be repeating myself, and you'll recognize that I'm repeating myself. I have always believed that if you want to solve this problem, you have to take it in smaller pieces, that the comprehensive insistence on a comprehensive solution is really insistence on no solution, because this is an issue that when you put, the more things you put on the table, you add more opponents to that legislation when you add things to it than you add new votes. And so I would still go back to where I've been on this issue for at least a decade, which is let's solve these problems one at a time. They'll each wind up with a better solution. We had a chance with DACA to solve one problem and I think some border security is part of that problem. We have a chance here looking at this family separation issue to see if we can begin to take things off the table. But border security is what is the key to solving every other problem. If you secure the border in a way people think is reasonable, they will be very reasonable about the other questions involving what happened at the border, like what do you do with people who came or stayed illegally? What do you do with people who came as children and had no choice and grew up here? What are the legitimate workforce needs of the country? I actually think arguing for a comprehensive solution is generally done by people who really like the politics of this and frankly don't want to solve the problem. They benefit from continuing to try to divide the country politically on this issue.
Senator, let me ask you about tariffs. The threat of tariffs, whether they are real, whether they are imaginable, but the conversation of tariffs and wherever we are in this trade war is having some effects. There's some companies down in Cape Girardeau that are laying off people. Harley-Davidson made that big announcement yesterday. How worried are you that this is going to start affecting more and more businesses?
Well, I've been worried about this since the president started talking about tariffs, and I've talked to him about it. I've talked publicly in front of him about my concerns about a trade war. The Poplar Bluff, I think, is what you're thinking of, the nail factory that makes steel nails. There's only one real component of steel nails besides labor and the factory structure itself, and that's steel. If you're paying 25% more for steel than all the nails coming into the United States are paying for steel, you've obviously got a disadvantage. Now, I think we're at the point now that the best hope is that the president's strategy actually pays off and that we reach a final conclusion that is much different than the current stated policy on tariffs being anything more than a short-term way to force people to the bargaining table. The Chinese clearly abuse the system. I have some real concerns about tariffs and using national security in a way that doesn't make sense to me or to most other people. So I think the president needs to be very thoughtful and careful about doing that. I think if you're looking at China and you're not talking about national security, you're talking about unfair trade practices, that is the one place that people are going to be more than willing to stand behind the administration's effort to straighten that out.
Senator Blunt, what are you reading?
You know, I actually have a pretty big list that's developed on my reading table right now. I'm a little bit behind. Matt Blunt recommended a book called The Fatal Sunday, which is about George Washington's army at Monmouth. Now, he is, in fairness to you, he's a little more willing to accept a lot of military detail in his reading than I am. And John Meacham's new book, The Soul of America, is there. And then I'm reading a book about DARPA, which is the sort of the defense agency that tries to come up with new things first, called the Pentagon's brain. So those are what I got stacked up right now.
Have you read Shoe Dog yet?
I have not read Shoe Dog. Is that what you're in the middle of?
Well, J.R. wrote it. My cousin wrote it.
No, I will read it. I read the Tender Bar, and if J.R. wrote Shoe Dog, I'll read Shoe Dog.
It's the Bill Gates said it's the best business biography he ever read. So
really,
yeah, it's a story of Phil Knight and the making of Nike. So it's really, you'll enjoy it.
Well, Bill Gates should know something about business.
Senator, have a good day. Thanks for checking in. 7:45.